Hello, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us at this webinar, which is basically a deep dive into the learning journey of our program's Strategic Leadership Program, which is a partnership between ISEG Business School Executive Education and Columbia Business School in New York. First of all, my name is Joana Santos Silva. I am the SLP Program Director. And I'd really like to thank you for your time and willingness to learn a little bit more about this exciting project. But before I give you sort of a deep dive and a guided tour of what this program is all about, I would like to share a little bit in terms of the insights on why this program was created, how it was created, and why we feel there is a need for leadership training. So our first insight is very much this: the need for leadership training on the one hand is very much linked to this issue of a increasingly complex external environment. So it is, I think, quite clear to all of us that leaders and leadership and managers are under great pressure, not only to perform, but also to be able to somehow motivate and align their people and their organization to guarantee their success. So this idea, and this is what we tried to capture in this slide, of this need to navigate a ship through an ocean that is full of waves, that most likely, at least in the short term, will not return to something serene and easy to guide, is to a great extent what leaders are facing. Not only that, but of course, there's increasing inconsistency in terms of market conditions. And the inconsistency of what happens in terms of the market, of course, makes it harder and harder. And there's an increasing struggle for managers, be them top managers or others, to create relevance. If you would prefer to put this in a more quantitative perspective, in 1990, basically half of the companies that were industry leaders, so if you were to take a list of the 500 largest companies, for example, in the Fortune 500 or S&P 500 list, those companies in the 1990s that were basically on that list were also leaders in 1955. So to a certain extent, there was consistency in maintaining relevance within the marketplace. By 1990 onwards, we saw a shift and an increased pressure in maintaining relevance. So in 2004, 2/3 of those market leaders no longer existed versus 1990. And currently at this rate of erosion, or at the current rate of erosion, the expectation is by 2025, which is basically tomorrow, 75% of all incumbent companies will have lost relevance. And when we say they have lost relevance, it's not necessarily, of course, that they will disappear, but they will lose somehow their place in the top 500 lists, which means ultimately they become less important for what is the marketplace. So apologies, I'd like to add, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to add those to the Q&A or the chat if you prefer. The other issue in many cases people ask is, so our strategic leadership program in partnership with Columbia is targeted to top managers. So it is very much for C-levels, for first-line directors or board members. And in many cases, there is this misconception that people who are already in this place or position of top leadership don't really necessarily need more leadership training because somehow they're already practicing as leaders. However, studies have shown, and I'd say the most comprehensive study on this issue from a very quantitative perspective is one that I'd like to share with you right now. So what happened was there were some researchers in 2017 that put 60,000 leaders through a 360-degree assessment. And the objective was ultimately to see and to measure how well their leadership skills were valued, of course, through not only their peers, but everyone who worked with them in the organization. 60,000 is a quite large number if you think about it. And the first insight that we found, or they found in this case, was only 13% of leaders, that were studied, have the ability to drive results and practice good people skills. So usually we think of leadership as not only, of course, the ability to perform and to guarantee an organization's success, but of course, obviously, to motivate and align our people in terms of organization. So only 13% of those were able somehow, or were recognized for being able to do that. The other interesting insight when they compared top managers, so when they compared C-levels, administrators, board members versus supervisors or middle managers, it was in fact perhaps strikingly so, and perhaps even counterintuitive in terms of the result. In reality, top managers were least likely to be rated highly on the both dimensions of what we usually would assume is good leadership. So rate highly both on business results and on team satisfaction. So in fact, supervisors were actually had better results in terms of their performance somehow, or at least their perception of performance as leaders. So as such, I would say that to a certain extent, there is still very much a need to work on your leadership skills, regardless of the fact if you're already in a position of top leadership. I would also add that perhaps what happens is ultimately as you grow in an organization, the challenges that you face can be more complex, and as such, it is harder to maintain this perception of great leadership. Now, of course, the external environment has also changed dramatically. So today, what makes a successful leader is perhaps not exactly what used to be, or the necessary, let's say, attributes of leadership in the past. So many times in the past, we would assume, great leaders were people who worked very hard, and it was very much about leading by example. Now, of course, this remains true, meaning that it's hardly very possible for you to lead without being a good example. But it's not just about working harder. You need to be able to foster certain specific attributes which are necessary to guarantee your own personal success as a leader, but of course the success of others in your team. So very much this was the inspiration of the project that the way that we approached the design of the program. And we tried to incorporate very much this idea of what is the new definition, therefore, of leadership. And I think that there's so many different definitions and concepts that are related to leadership, but perhaps this is the one that makes the most sense to me, at least specifically, because it's very wide in its scope, but it most definitely reflects what is the most important thing that a leader does in their organization. So of course they need to maximize their own personal potential, but they also need to be able to maximize the potential of their workforce. So it means ultimately realizing potential in yourself and in the people you lead. Now, one of the big shifts in terms of leadership today is it used to be that leadership was very much seen as something that was very unidirectional, which means ultimately leaders would have impact on their people, and those people would in turn perform. So somehow I would inspire people to create or to guarantee above average performance. Today, what we find is this idea of leadership is actually a process of co-creation in terms of not only the leader's identity, but also the identity of their teams and their own personal performance and their performance of their teams. So in fact, it seems like it's more of a fluid, virtuous cycle of exchange and growth and development versus just, the leader somehow inspires others. So that's very much this idea and this new definition of leadership, which is in fact this idea that we are continuously growing, continuously learning, continuously developing ourselves and others. These same authors came to this idea or this concept of the 3 catalysts for realizing potential. And what they said is today, if you were to try to find the 3 attributes that really distinguish exceptional leaders versus other managers, you probably find these 3 characteristics. The first one they call realistic optimism. So this idea that people who are realistically optimistic will go after the audacious goals, will try to fulfill and succeed in things that others would somehow ignore because it would be too difficult. However, they are quite aware of the challenges and difficulties that they're going to face. So they're optimistic, meaning they feel that they can succeed. However, they are very clear and realistic in terms of what are the challenges that lie ahead. The second attribute is this idea of subservience to purpose. So very much this idea that really exceptional leaders measure their value by how much they're contributing to the purpose and the impact that their organization is creating. So these are people who are typically very, very dedicated, who are very stimulated by their organization and put a great amount of importance on the goal and on realizing this goal. And then, of course, in a world that today, in many cases, we now use a new acronym, no longer VUCA, but TUNA, which means turbulent, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So ultimately, we are managing in chaos. The third catalyst is very much related to this dimension, which is the ability to find order in chaos. So exceptional leaders are people who actually like and find great joy in tackling multidimensional problems. But more than just finding joy in those, they're actually really good at clarifying what is happening. So they're usually the people who are able to make sense of the chaos and explain it to others. So somehow they lead by example in this case because they make sense of what is happening and help others find the way to move forward. So when you take all of these elements that somehow I've tried to summarize very quickly, this is how we designed the strategic leadership program. And I'd like to really briefly and quickly give you a little bit of a picture on how it was, what was the reasoning behind this. So the program has what we call 3 steps or 3 pillars, if you prefer. The first pillar, it happens in Lisbon always, and it's called the leader's agenda. And this is very much focused on, I'd say, the big business challenges that companies are facing today. So it focuses less on leadership per se, but it will give you tools that are very much related to the topics that are usually on a leader's agenda. We've been very, let's say, very cautious to change the leader's agenda. So last year's agenda was a little bit different from this year's because, of course, as you know, the challenges that arise are very much based and connected to the external context that companies are facing. So the idea is to make this as fresh and as well reflecting of what's happening in the marketplace. The second pillar, we call it the leader's journey. And this entire section of the program is very much facing and looking and focusing on what is leadership. But more specifically, it is very much based on an exercise in which participants go through what we call the leader's journey. So they will reflect on their values, they will reflect on their purpose, they will reflect on who they are. So it's very much about self-reflection and understanding what are your strengths, your weaknesses, what are your pivot points, what has happened through your own personal development to have brought you to this position of leadership. But most importantly is what do you want to accomplish further? So it is very much a moment where you can stop, think, dissect, reflect, and create what we've called the leader's credo. So ultimately, your own personal plan moving forward. What do you want to accomplish? How do you want to be seen as a leader? It is a very special part of the program because there's a lot of peer-to-peer interaction. We are very careful in only admitting people to the program who are, let's say, equals in terms of leadership profile and leadership challenges. So you learn a lot, not only through your own self-reflection, but you will learn a lot from your peers and, of course, from the conversation and discussions and sharing that happens throughout this entire section of the program. And then finally, it's important always to, after I've gone through a journey like this, to have a moment to consolidate information, to consolidate somehow what, or if you have in fact applied some of the things that you had set yourself out to do. So our final pillar is called the Faces of Leadership. And it is very much inspired on this idea that there are many types of leaders. They don't necessarily have to be managers, but more than that, when I interact with different type of leadership styles and even contexts, what can I take away from that? So of course, I don't want to mimic, meaning I do not want to copy somebody else's leadership style, but I would definitely like to be inspired by some of their learnings and perhaps incorporate what makes sense to me moving forward. So it's this idea of, once again, sharing leadership challenges, sharing different contexts amongst peers, and of course, amongst these invited leaders who will give you a different way and will help you look at leadership through a different lens. To give you a little bit more detail, and perhaps I'll go very quickly through this. So like I said, the first pillar is called the leader's agenda, and it starts very much with, of course, with learning about who are the people who are doing this program with you. I cannot stress enough the fact that we're extremely selective in terms of our participant profile. So it is extremely important that you get to learn with your peers. And we can guarantee that because the level of the peer group is really quite extraordinary. The first session is leading with strategic agility. So this idea, of course, that in this world of complexity, in this world of great change, you prefer going back to that first slide of, riding the ocean. How do I manage in uncertainty, in which I need to be extremely agile, if you prefer flexible, in terms of my strategic rationale and, of course, the strategy of my organization. The second day is very much based on, once again, what are these hot topics in the leaders' agenda? And it's very much an open debate on what are the key issues that leaders and companies are facing. There's a session then followed by a session on global economy. So I would say it's pretty clear today that we need to understand what are the macro aspects of what's happening in terms of global economy. How will this impact not only our economy here locally, but of course, specifically within the context of my organization. Following that, there's a very special session with basically the father of governance and how governance is linked to prosperity and what that means for leaders in today's world. So we have an invited professor who's Colin Meyer, comes from the University of Oxford, who will explain exactly how this mindset and this thinking of governance has to have an impact on being a sustainable organization, a prosperous organization, a purpose-driven organization. Now, of course, leadership also has to do a lot with values. So there's a sunset session, which are usually shorter sessions that tend to introduce a different type of topic, probably less hard, but much more makes us reflect on the importance of not only reflections, but like I said, values. So there's a session that's called the power of gratitude. So how do I incorporate the fact that I actually am quite lucky to be in a position of leadership, that I actually am quite lucky to be basically one of the 1% in our country, for example, and why that's so important as a leader. How do I incorporate that practice of gratitude, once again, my day-to-day, and how can that reflect, or how can that even make me be a better leader? The following day, there's a session that's very much focused on creating future scenarios. So once again, in a world that is not only fast changing, but highly uncertain, this idea and this ability and a toolkit for how to build future scenarios is extremely important. So of course, we know that the idea of trying to assess and ascertain exactly what's going to happen in the future is always incorrect to a certain extent, but not having the ability or not having the tools to be able to do this as an exercise, which somehow prepares me for some of the future challenges, is also not a good option as a leader. So it's bringing that into your toolkit. That's followed by a session that is quite interesting, which is this new concept that comes out of the University of Chicago, which is called nudge. And nudge theory is very much how do we get people to behave a certain way, in particular using small, interactions, and how can nudging be used actually to increase my ability to motivate my people, align my people, and somehow get people on board in terms, especially in very difficult, challenging, not only times, but tasks. Now, today, it would be impossible for us not also to talk about technology. And within technology, we're talking, of course, about artificial intelligence and GAN. And of course, the big hot topic right now is ChatGPT, but not only. So, and all other sort of ideas within technology and how that's impacting in terms of business. So we have the opportunity to basically have one of the biggest specialists in AI in the country, who's Arlindo Oliveira, who is a professor at Universidade Técnica, who will explain what are these mega trends, and specifically not just technology and the trend itself, but how it impacts and how you should incorporate that in your not only perhaps planning, but especially the minimum you need to understand as a leader in terms of what this means. Once again, I'd say the following session doesn't really need to be explained in terms of its importance. We are currently facing a world with a changing geopolitical, I'd say, chessboard. So there's, the war in Russia and Ukraine. there's increasing tensions in Asia and China. So what do these changes in geopolitics impact? How, as a leader, do I reflect on this? Do I need to be concerned? How do I put this once again into my planning? What tools can I use to somehow prepare for these issues? It's followed this day by a really interesting dinner because it's a dinner where you have the opportunity to meet with young people. So we call it the multi-generational teams session. What it means is basically you have a vast group of usually Gen Zs, maybe some millennials as well, who will explain to you what are their expectations from leaders today, how they see organizations, how they look at work, what attracts them to an organization, not only from the work perspective, but also even as a consumer perspective. So what do they truly value? And it's sort of unscripted, so to a certain extent, there's no agenda here. And you have completely the ability to ask any questions from these people and truly understand in a safe environment what is going on in their heads, how they think, what they value. And we finish off the program in Lisbon with a very interesting session, which is called Human-Centered Leadership. So it is your first true taste test in terms of pure leadership session, and it somehow prepares you for what's going to happen in New York. So what is this idea of being a leader who's actually focused on this idea of potential once again? So not only my own personal potential, but the potential of my team and others. So of course, Lisbon wraps up and we move to New York. We start with New York with my program director, whose name is Bruce Craven. Bruce is a really great guy. He follows us the entire time when we're in New York. So he somehow builds and has created this exercise, which is the hero's journey and the leadership credo. And you'll see that it is interspersed with some other sessions. But ultimately, it is a unique, one-of-a-kind experience because it really is a journey from end to end. So the sessions are all intertwined, they build on each other, and ultimately will end up with what we call the credo. So we start with Bruce, and he explains what is this idea of the hero's journey, how we use conflict and tension to ultimately help us create success. And of course, we have a nice welcome dinner, which is always quite important. So we try also to add a lot of social activities, which will help you, get to know your peers better. The following day, you continue adding on to the hero's journey. In this case, you start working on your leadership credo and your lifeline exercise, which is, once again, is extremely important. It's very powerful moments of sharing with your peers. You will learn what are the critical points in your life in terms of your learning as a leader, which were the moments of pivot, and you will learn with the others as well. We usually follow up with a session with the United Nations. We have the opportunity to get to a really interesting session, which is focused on the Human Development Report. So we reflect on what are the main challenges that are facing humanity right now, how people throughout the world are thinking of the challenges and difficulties they're facing. You can deep dive into certain countries specifically, and why it's so important to understand that right now we're actually at, let's say, unfortunately, a negative inversion in terms of human development in the last 2 years, and why it is so important for organizations and leaders to somehow help lift up people. It's the 4th of October is probably one of my favorite sessions, which is from Xining Ma. She talks about leadership and choice, fantastic woman. One of the best people in the world, recognized leader in terms of thought leadership, in terms of choice. And she explains, how to choose decision making, how you shouldn't limit your decision making, in particular when you are in a position of leadership, and why that's so important in terms of your development. It's followed by a session on value-based leadership. So once again, this idea that you cannot create your credo and your lifeline until you really truly understand your values. So ultimately, when in doubt, when you are faced with difficult decisions, what are the values that will somehow act as your compass for that? The next day is followed also once again by extremely extraordinary person who's called Stephen Meyer. He is once again one of the world's largest leaders in terms of thought, as well in terms of the future of work. So for sure, I don't think there is a single leader currently right now that doesn't have questions about what are the best ways to organize work, what are the best ways to attract talent, retain talent. So it's very much based on this, very science-based. So he has a lot of information and a lot of studies, and he's working with organizations every day to understand what is this idea of the future of work. This is followed by a very special session. It doesn't take place on Columbia campus. It takes place at the 9/11 Memorial. And it's very much about leading in a crisis. And the point in this case is you will get to meet firsthand a first respondent. So a person who was involved in the 9/11 attacks, who saw many of his comrades dying and his peers dying, who saw leaders dying in this situation, and they had to keep moving, they had to keep deciding and making very difficult decisions. So what happens when everything falls apart and suddenly you're still in a position of leadership? And in many cases, it didn't even start. In the morning, you probably weren't even a leader. So it is a very poignant testimony, but more than that, it truly is a lesson in leading in crisis. And we finish off the week, of course, with the presentation of the leadership credos by the group, and we have a wrap up with something that is really very special and quite unique, which is the Leadership Jazz. Leadership Jazz is a session which is brought to you by Chris Washburn. He is the director of the Columbia Music Department. He has won several Grammys, and he brings in his jazz band, which is world class. And it is very much this idea of what can we learn from music, but in particular, what can we learn from jazz in terms of leadership? And can I take some learnings from that? It is really not only of extraordinary quality in terms of the music, but is truly extraordinary from the learning and, once again, the sharing that happens through this Leadership Jazz. So it really is a great way for us to finish New York Week. Now, finally, as I said, it wouldn't be an interesting program without the sort of final day. The final day is, once again, very special, because it's this idea of how can I learn from others, in particular, others who come from a space that is not specifically management. So we call it the Faces of Leadership, and it sort of has three big guest stars, let's put it this way. And in between the guest stars, you will learn a little bit about the neuroscience behind leadership, the neuroscience, for example, behind storytelling. And also, in many cases, how can you become more adaptive as a leader? But in addition to, let's say, the concepts and the conceptual parts of the programs, and you will be writing also a letter to yourself in terms of what do you want to do in 6 months as a leader, you will be gaining inspiration from three very special people. And those three very special people are Admiral Bouvet-Mills. So he will explain in a very closed environment. So it's very, one-to-one and almost unscripted once again. He'll explain what has been his leader's journey, how he has learned what is leadership, especially in different types of contexts. And, how he also had to change his own leadership style, depending on what the challenges he was facing. You'll have a really interesting session with the Vice President of the Arts faculty from the University of Lisbon, who will explain to you what is creative leadership, in particular, this idea of innovation and creativity, and how that isn't, in fact, a topic that you do by yourself. So it is actually a collective sport, is not an individual assignment. And how can we build, innovation and creativity as a group? So ultimately, he will guide you through an exercise and this idea of leading creatively, and why you need other people to actually produce something which is extraordinary and of great quality. And not only that, that's something that is truly innovative. And then you will have a session with two Michelin star chefs, so Enrique Sapsoa, who will explain also, once again, his own leadership journey, what he has learned, how does he go from being somebody who's ultimately a chef who would work in the kitchen and today obviously has a different type of approach, how he's created spaces on the one hand to be extremely efficient, high quality, versus how he's created space for continuing to improve and to innovate and continue to change what he wants to bring to people in terms of his own business and his art, if you prefer. And of course, if you get the opportunity to meet a chef, you'd also like the opportunity to have his dinner. So we also have this really great privileged situation where he cooks for us, and that's the final meal that we have together. And then there's a diploma ceremony. So this is ultimately, very quickly, the idea of the entire journey of the Strategic Leadership Program. I would like to share with you, however, more than me telling you about the program, we do have some testimonials from the first edition. So last year was the first year that we ran the Strategic Leadership Program with ISEG plus Columbia. So I'd really like for you to hear from themselves directly what some of the people who participated in the first edition thought of the program.
I came to this program with high expectations. Until now, it has been fantastic. It was far beyond my initial expectations. The group is so different, and so far, what I bring with me is my self-evaluation as a leader, and some tools to guide me for the future more than the career, to make me think about myself and as I am as a leader, and how I can develop people in my job.
This program has been an exceptional experience for me so far. We've had a great combination between first few sessions in Lisbon, where we had some teachers speak to us about a specific set of tools that we could use in our leadership profiles, and here in New York, an amazing session, an amazing group of sessions with professors that taught us how to look more into our personal leadership style, how we make our choices, how we convey them to others, and how we can bring our organizations to follow us in terms of the purpose that we all want to pursue.
This experience. So, in my personal level, I wanted to take some time away from work to engage new challenge, to develop myself. So I think ISEG Columbia was a perfect fit, considering the strongness of the brand and the quality of the people involved. My expectations were high, but the reality was even higher. The group was fantastic, the diversity of the group, the knowledge within the group. I think the people involved, especially the speakers, were enthusiastic, were enlightening, and so even being the expectations high, the reality was much better.
It's a privilege. It's quite an amazing experience for life. It is an opportunity to talk with amazing teachers, be in an amazing place, have amazing colleagues. But what I really do more appreciate is to also share with my colleagues my experience, learn from them, and learn from all the environment that we are feeling here. Since Lisbon to New York, and we are going back to Lisbon, I think that this is a great, great journey, and thank you very much, ISEG, and a very special knowledge to the team that prepared everything. Thank you very much.
When I accepted this challenge, my expectations were to learn a little bit more about management to help me with my business, learn with my peers. And what I found out in these 3 days was that the group is an excellent group. I'm also going to learn with them lots of things that are very good for my business.
I was really curious and excited about the program, and my expectation is to challenge me and also inspire me as a leader, and it's a very good opportunity for me to think about my path and how will be my impact as a leader in the society.
I'm really impressed with the infrastructure. It's really good conditions over here in ISEG. The quality of professors are very good as well, and I'm looking forward to have the bit in Columbia University.
Expectations from this course were, well, the reality of this course exceeds highly the expectations that I had. The level of the participants and the level of keynote speakers was very high, and I think it's a very important moment for us to all to stop and reflect on our business activities, and I believe this is somehow achieve and exceed my own personal expectations.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Filipe Cristóvão, and I'm the Custom and International Programs Director, and I will be very happy to answer all your questions regarding this program. For the meanwhile, I have here a few questions that you shared with us and that I'd like to ask Professor Joana to help us explore. So the first question is, the Strategic Leadership Program is a joint program with Columbia Business School. Why did you choose Columbia?
So it actually took us about a year to scope partners. We had asked, so we started with a bit of some focus groups with some of these, some target members, so CEOs and board members, and we asked them what they would prefer, if they prefer a European experience, an American experience. So it ended up being the United States, it ended up being a little bit East Coast versus West Coast, and then of course we chose the partner who seemed to us was best suited for this program. So firstly, of course, Columbia Business School is #1 in terms of ranking currently for their MBA and their executive education programs. So undoubtedly a leader in terms of this space. They're also very recognized in the space of leadership. So it wasn't just about being good in management, because of course that they are. They were very flexible in terms of designing the program with us. So they really liked the fact that we added, and they were very willing to add different types of methodologies, which I think adds a lot to the quality of the program. So the program is not just about giving people concepts, it's about giving them tools and methodologies that actually help them transform as leaders. So it's not, at this level of leadership, I would say you don't want a program that's simply based on conceptual frameworks. You actually want to do things. And they were really good at that as well. Plus this idea of a partner who's based in one of the biggest cities in the world. So as their own, I'm going to steal their own sentence, which is at the very center of business. So
they're an Ivy League school, right?
They're Ivy League. They are the only Ivy League who's based in a major city. If you don't know, Columbia Business School, and actually the entire Columbia University campus is based in Manhattan, not just New York, but in Manhattan. And we had the privilege, and that was just an added privilege, of being able to be in a very new building. So the business school was the first one to benefit from this new campus that they're building. So we were basically one of the first few programs that actually used their new site. So build a new building right on the Hudson River, super fantastic in terms of amenities, high tech. I'm sort of envious for all the great things they have, but yeah, so great quality partner, #1, super recognized, Ivy League, Manhattan. It was just perfect, and they're just a great partner to work with. So I really think it was special. Yeah,
a no-brainer here. The choice was a no-brainer.
No-brainer. We were, lucky to find them. Lucky that they wanted to work with us. I think we've established a really good relationship with them as well. Yeah.
Okay, so we heard a few testimonials from the participants of the first edition. In your opinion, what did they value most? We heard from a few of them, but in your opinion, and knowing very well the group, what do you think were really the key points of the program for them?
Okay, I think they were a little bit surprised with the kickoff when they met each other, and I don't want to explain too much, but it has to do, there's a lot of music in this program, if you don't know, right, but you know. So they were impacted right in the beginning with a very transformational experience. It's based on science, so it was based on the neuroscience behind learning, and then of course we added music to the mix. And I think it was a really good icebreaker because they were all out of their comfort zone. And one of the great things about this program, in particular this first edition, was how fantastic we created this group cohesion. I don't think I've ever seen, in all my experience, I'm being quite frank, a group that really just works together really well. And that was, of course, one of the big value adds of this program, which was not only the quality of the people, but the value of the network that was created. And I truly do believe that it was special, that what we were able to do. So I think that first session was quite impactful. I think most of them, so I'm gonna go back to music. I think most of them loved leadership jazz. I mean, Chris Washburn is a character. So it's not just, of course, the quality of the music, like I said, the way he's able to guide you through that session, and he's very provocative. So he really makes you think. It's not about cliches. It's really special. I've seen other leadership jazz sessions, and this is one of a kind. And then we were lucky once again to be in this fabulous room with, 10-meter high, I think, ceilings, totally glass, facing Hudson River. It was really quite special, I think. So from what I heard from most of the participants, this was a very special moment. And of course, it was the final sort of cherry on the cake before you leave New York. So it really left something special. I think the 9/11 memorial session is really deep. It's not an easy story to hear, but it puts a lot of things in perspective. And I have to be honest, I myself, who had somehow designed it and spoken to them before, I was very moved with the session, to the point where when I went to say thank you to the guest speaker, I told them I don't know how to say thank you to someone like you, meaning it really was something quite different, something I won't forget quite easily, and it really does change you somehow, meaning you really do have to reflect on what you listen to. I think a lot of stuff also, so I think the multi-generational panel was quite cool. We saw a lot of debate, a lot of hard questions as well. I think there were a lot of hard questions from our young people. There were a lot of hard questions from the managers. It was quite interesting to see. So, nobody sort of held back in terms of giving their very direct and sincere opinion. And I think that was quite good, because that was literally, non-strategic, no agenda, people just sharing literally what their thoughts are. And you saw in certain situations where the tension is, in certain situations, of course, where the bridges are between generations. I think that was quite good. I think there were social moments in terms of the program, which are not officially part of the agenda in terms of the learning journey, that were quite special. I mean, we went to an NBA game from New York Knicks, Madison Square Garden. We were very close, right, to the court. That's always quite exciting. A lot of dinners, a lot of social conversation, which is quite important once again to build the network. So I'd say that was really, really special. And of course, the final day. I think the final day is something unique, because it really does go through a lot of ups and downs in terms of, impactful moments. But I do feel that it is transformational. And at the end, it's one day. It is a bit intense, it's true. But they're not, let's say, there are not a lot of days in your life like that, I think, in terms of the value that you go through in such an intense period of time. So I think the Admiral said a lot of things that he wouldn't say in any other context.
No media in the classroom, right? So he was
there was no media
authentic.
in the classroom. He knew it was a safe space. He told it like it was. The art session, people having to interpret other people's ideas into something that they probably don't usually do in their day-to-day, which is of course creating something, is quite special. And then, I am a fan of Sap's, not only his food, but I think his story as he's grown as a business as well is quite interesting to hear. So you learn a lot as well.
So many highlights on the program.
I think there's a lot of highlights. These were, I think, so I'm not saying my favorite. I think these would be more or less the consensus of the favorites of everyone else. I have some of them in here as well, but.
Okay, I'd like to ask the participants, if you have further questions, please write them on the Q&A so that we can answer. For the time being, I have another question, which is, what makes the strategic leadership program different from other top management programs? There are several top management programs in Portugal and abroad. Why is this program so distinctive?
I think it has to do a lot with the methodology. It's not, so of course, first of all, it's not a management program, meaning you're not doing finance and marketing, and you're doing leadership. So of course we do the leadership's agenda, which is not specifically leadership, but it is the key components of what leaders are facing today. And then it's basically focused on your development as a leader. So now, of course, there are many programs on leadership, but to be sincere, I think what we did was create something that was truly unique and special in terms of methodology. So like I said, and I'd like to reinforce it, you do have the science behind what you're listening to. So of course, it's very much, it's rooted into something which is structured and has been proven, but it's not about listening to concepts. It's not all about listening to authors. It's about actually creating an exercising experience that will truly, I think, hopefully transform you. Because you have to go through all this self-reflection. You have to somehow share with your peers. You learn a lot from that interaction as well. And that's why we're so particular in terms of the target, which means, you know, the big part of this value does come from a lot of the sharing and the experience that you go through. So I think all these very, you know, special moments, it's very hard, I would assume, for you to come out at the end and say, okay, I heard some sound bites, it was interesting. It's not about sound bites. It's really a little bit different in terms of, you know, putting you through a journey that helps you build and develop, I hope. So of course, we're not assuming that your starting point is zero. As a leader, we actually assume that you know a lot about leadership, and you've probably heard a lot about leadership. So it's actually building on that, and in particular taking into account the context of today. So, you know, leadership challenges are not the same as they were in the past, which is somehow what I tried to explain in the beginning.
Okay, I think we don't have further questions. Last chance, if you have something else you'd like to ask. Well, I will be always available to answer all your questions. You can contact me at any time. And you can also find all the information regarding this program on its website, which is slp.isegcolumbia.com. You will have there all the information regarding the dates, the pricing, the faculty. And if you need any additional information, please feel free to contact us. We will be more than happy to answer all your questions. So thank you all for being with us, and I hope you will be able to join us in this very inspiring project. Hope to see you in September.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.